Have you ever witnessed a moment so outrageous it made your heart race and your jaw drop at the same time? Imagine this. A high-powered airline executive, dressed in an expensive suit, confidently stepping onto a gleaming private jet. His polished shoes echo across the cabin floor as he surveys the luxurious space. Then his eyes land on a well-dressed black family settling into plush leather seats. Without hesitation, he orders them to leave, certain they have no right to be there. The tension is thick, the insult undeniable. But what he doesn't realize is that he's just made the biggest mistake of his career. The very jet he's trying to guard so fiercely, it doesn't belong to him, it belongs to them. And karma is only just getting started. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited to hear how this story unfolds, press 1 in the comments. If not, press 0. Your feedback helps bring more inspiring and powerful stories to life. At Westwood Executive Airport in Connecticut, the usual rhythm of private jets arriving and departing hummed in the background. In the distance, the low roar of commercial planes from Bradley International Airport blended with the sound of the wind. It was a crisp afternoon, with storm clouds forming on the horizon, casting dramatic shadows over the sleek aircraft lined up along the exclusive tarmac. Among them sat a magnificent Onyx Falcon X, a marvel of engineering and wealth, its polished exterior reflecting the golden patches of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Inside the modern, glass-walled VIP terminal, a well-dressed black family of 4 walked toward the reception desk. They were the Langfords, a family whose success had been built through years of innovation and philanthropy. Julius Langford, the father, stood tall with a quiet confidence, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. His tech empire had revolutionized data security. Vanessa Langford, his wife, exuded grace in an elegant emerald green dress, her success as a philanthropist and investor just as remarkable as her husband's. Their son, Elijah Langford, 17, sported a smart blazer over a crisp white shirt, his eyes filled with curiosity. Their daughter, Sienna Langford, 12, bounced alongside them, her stylish yet playful outfit reflecting her youthful excitement. As they reached the reception desk, Elijah's sharp eyes caught sight of a man in a slate-gray suit marching through the terminal with an air of authority. His name badge read Martin Steele, CEO of Orion Airways, a major commercial airline that had recently expanded into private aviation. Martin Steele was known for his ruthless business tactics, and among insiders for his narrow views on who belonged in elite circles. His company was rumored to be scouting Westwood Executive Airport for potential acquisitions, but no one expected him to be here today. Julius, who had recently seen Steele featured in Business Elite magazine, recognized him immediately. Just as the Langfords checked in, the front desk agent greeted them warmly. "Everything is set, Mr. Langford," she confirmed. "Captain Hayes and your flight crew are expecting you on board. Welcome back." With that, the family moved toward the security checkpoint. A uniformed guard at the gate gave them a respectful nod, clearly familiar with who they were. Outside on the tarmac, Martin Steele paced near the aircraft hangars, deep in thought. The weight of negotiations and his latest expansion plans swirled in his mind. But when his gaze fell upon the Langfords heading toward the Onyx Falcon X, his expression hardened. He strode forward, eyebrows knitting together as he scanned the jet, then turned his intense gaze on Julius. "Excuse me," Steele said, his voice laced with condescension. "I think you're a little lost. That plane belongs to an important client. If you're looking to book a charter, you'll want to check in at the main terminal." Julius paused, his composed expression barely betraying his irritation. Vanessa, sensing the shift in the air, exchanged a knowing glance with her husband. "Do I know you?" Julius asked, keeping his voice polite. Steele straightened his tie, his tone dripping with self-importance. "I'm Martin Steele," he declared, as if that alone should explain everything. "And this particular jet is being prepped for an upcoming business negotiation. It's not open for tours." Elijah tensed. Sienna, usually full of energy, suddenly clung to her mother's hand. Vanessa took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Steele, we're not here for a tour. We're here because—" Steele held up a hand, cutting her off. "Look," he said impatiently, glancing between them. If you need help arranging a more appropriate flight, I can have one of my team assist you." The words hung in the air, sharp with unspoken meaning. Julius exhaled slowly, steadying himself. They had encountered prejudice before, but rarely this blatant. "That won't be necessary," Julius said evenly. "We have every right to be here." Steele's expression darkened. "If you don't have the proper credentials, I'm going to have to insist you step away from this aircraft immediately." With a snap of his fingers, he signaled to a nearby security guard, "Please escort these people off the premises." A hushed silence fell over the tarmac. Even the ground crew, some mid-task, turned their heads toward the unfolding confrontation. Vanessa's grip on Sienna's hand tightened. Elijah clenched his jaw. Julius squared his shoulders, refusing to be dismissed so easily. Before he could respond, a strong, familiar voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Steele." Descending the steps of the Onyx Falcon X, Captain Hayes, a seasoned pilot with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward. He looked directly at Steele. "These are my employers, the Langford family, and this jet belongs to them." Martin Steele's gaze swept over the Langford family, his expression a mix of irritation and deep-seated bias. His lips curled slightly as he exhaled, shaking his head as if he had dealt with this type of situation before. Vanessa Langford, always poised, stepped forward. Her voice remained steady yet firm. "Mr. Steele, we're not here for a tour. We're here because..." Before she could finish, Steele raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. A pair of security officers from Orion Airways stood nearby, subtly shifting in anticipation, waiting for Steele's command. "Do you need me to escort you back to the main terminal?" Steele's question dripped with condescension. "We have plenty of staff who can help direct you to the appropriate flights." Elijah's eyes widened at the blatant disrespect, while Sienna instinctively squeezed her mother's hand. Julius, his patience wearing thin, squared his shoulders. Over the years he had experienced moments of quiet bias, subtle exclusions. But this was different. This was overt. This was brazen. "That won't be necessary," Julius said, his voice even, his restraint admirable. "My family and I have every right to be here." But Steele wasn't done. His frustration boiled over as he cut Julius off again. "Listen, sir, this is private property," Steele snapped. "If you don't have the right credentials, I'm going to have to insist you and your family step away from this aircraft immediately." He turned sharply to his security guards and snapped his fingers. "Please remove these people from the premises." A hush fell over the tarmac. The ground crew, mechanics, flight attendants, baggage handlers, stopped what they were doing. Some stole uncertain glances at one another. A few looked outright uncomfortable. It was clear they were witnessing something they weren't sure they should be seeing. Vanessa reached for Julius's arm, a silent signal to remain composed. She tried one last time. "You must be mistaken, Mr. Steele," she said, keeping her voice measured. "We do have the proper credentials." Steele let out a bored sigh, waving a dismissive hand. Yes, I've heard it all before," he said, rolling his eyes. "People see a fancy jet and suddenly think they're entitled to walk right in. But this is not a playground. This is a high-level corporate asset." His eyes flicked back to the security detail. "I'm not going to ask again. Escort them out." Elijah, still a teenager but fiercely protective of his family, bristled at the dismissive tone. His fists clenched. "You have no right to talk to my mother like that," he snapped, anger vibrating through his voice. Steele's mouth twitched in thinly veiled disdain. "Young man, I'd be careful if I were you. You wouldn't want things to escalate." From the top of the jet steps, Captain Hayes, the Langford's longtime pilot, watched in stunned silence. He had always known that prejudice existed, but to see it so blatantly unfold on this very tarmac, it made his blood boil. He hesitated for just a moment. Should he step in, or should he wait for the right moment? The flight attendant, standing behind him, covered her mouth in shock. Below, Julius let out a slow breath, calming himself before speaking again. "If you would do me the courtesy of stepping inside the jet," he said, "you'd see that we are not intruders, Mr. Steele. My name is Julius Langford. Perhaps that rings a bell?" Steele stared at him, unimpressed. "Should it?" he scoffed. "I know a lot of people." Then, without another word, he turned back to security. "No more nonsense. Do your job." The guards stepped forward, one reaching toward Julius. Vanessa instinctively pulled Sienna into her arms, shielding her daughter from the unnecessary aggression. And that was the moment Captain Hayes decided he'd had enough. He descended the steps in his crisp pilot's uniform, his face tight with frustration. "Excuse me, Mr. Steele." His voice was calm but commanding. Steele, mid-command, turned sharply, blinking as if surprised that someone had dared to interrupt him. Captain Hayes came to a stop directly between Steele and the Langfords, standing tall, shoulders squared. "These are my employers," he said, voice even. "The Langford family. And this jet?" A beat of silence. "It belongs to them." A flicker of shock passed across Steele's face. But he wasn't ready to back down just yet. He turned to the pilot, his tone now strained, as if forcing out the words tasted bitter. "What do you mean, their jet?" Captain Hayes, ever professional, gave a curt nod. "With all due respect, Mr. Steele, Mr. and Mrs. Langford have owned the Onyx Falcon X for the past 6 months. They're here today to conduct a final inspection after the cabin's recent upgrades." The silence was deafening. A flush of color, part embarrassment, part humiliation, rose to Steele's face. Julius folded his arms, waiting. Vanessa tightened her lips, unwilling to let this moment pass without acknowledgement of the blatant disrespect they had just endured. Steele cleared his throat, struggling to regain his composure. "Well, this is quite unexpected," he muttered. "I was under the impression that Orion Airways was leasing this jet for a potential corporate partnership." His eyes flicked toward the tail number, as if needing one last confirmation that he had made a terrible mistake. Julius didn't let up. His voice remained firm, an undeniable mix of anger and quiet dignity. "Perhaps your employees, or you personally, were misinformed." He took a single step forward, locking eyes with Steele. "Now, if you don't mind, my family and I have a flight to catch." Steele looked like a cornered animal, his mind scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Yes. Well, Martin Steele adjusted his tie, forcing a thin, insincere smile. "I do apologize if there was a misunderstanding." Elijah let out a sharp snort of disbelief, while Vanessa raised an unimpressed eyebrow at the choice of words. Steele's eyes flicked between them, his calculating mind searching for a quick escape route. Eventually, he motioned for his security guards to step back. "I'll leave you to your flight then. My apologies." But his words felt hollow, more like a forced retreat than true regret. The Langfords watched as Steele spun on his heel, muttering something under his breath to his security team before storming off toward a nearby hangar. The family exchanged glances, caught between anger and relief. Sienna, who had remained mostly quiet, let out a shaky breath. "Dad, that was scary." Julius placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over now, sweetheart. Let's get inside." Each step up the jet's stairway felt heavy. None of them could have predicted how far-reaching the consequences of this moment would be. But soon, the entire aviation world and social media would be talking about the airline CEO who had tried to remove a black family from their own plane. And karma? Karma was just getting started. Julius settled into one of the cream-colored leather seats, his heart still pounding with lingering frustration. Across from him, Vanessa sat gracefully, though her expression was tight with emotion, a mixture of hurt and quiet determination. Elijah dropped onto the plush sofa by the cabin window, arms crossed, still seething. Sienna, biting her lip, busied herself with the new gold-trimmed seatbelt buckle, running her fingers over the smooth design. But her eyes darted anxiously between her parents. The sound of polished shoes on the silk carpet signaled Captain Hayes's cautious approach. "Mr. Langford," he began, his tone full of quiet regret. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I had no idea Steele would act that way." Julius raised a hand, shaking his head. "Not your fault, Captain. You did the right thing." Hayes nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "We're ready for takeoff whenever you are. The flight plan to Miami is filed. We'll adjust our route slightly to avoid the storm system moving up the coast." Vanessa offered a weary smile. "Thank you, Captain. We appreciate your professionalism." With a respectful nod, Hayes turned back toward the cockpit, leaving the Langfords to absorb everything that had just happened. A flight attendant, young and still nervous in her new role, approached hesitantly, offering the family refreshments. But Vanessa's mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts kept circling back to Steele's arrogance, the way he dismissed them, the way he assumed they didn't belong. she murmured, half to herself. All these years, and it never gets easier. Julius exhaled, watching her closely. He knew that look, the frustration of working so hard, building so much, only to still face this kind of ignorance. We've done everything right, he said softly. We built something from the ground up. We live with dignity, and yet in a moment it's like none of that matters, like our success is invisible. Elijah, his anger still raw, shook his head. Dad, why didn't you just call him out from the start? His voice was tight. You let him talk down to us forever before the pilot stepped in. Julius sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We tried, son, but men like him, they don't listen, not until they're forced to. Elijah's fists clenched. He's a bigot. Sienna looked up, her voice small and uncertain. What's gonna happen now? Vanessa answered gently, stroking her daughter's hair. We continue as planned, sweetheart. We go to Miami, finalize our scholarship partnership with the university, and we come home. Sienna nodded, half reassured but still shaken. She leaned into her mother's side, seeking comfort. Moments later, the deep hum of the engines filled the cabin, and the jet began taxiing toward the runway. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft droplets streaking across the windows. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a fitting echo of the turbulence that had just unfolded on the ground. The weather seemed almost symbolic. Yet as the plane lifted off the ground, soaring through the dense gray clouds, the cabin lights flickered warmly, a stark contrast to the storm below. Normally, this flight would be a celebration. The newly upgraded Onyx Falcon X was meant to be a symbol of their success, their hard work, their legacy. But tonight, the air inside the jet was heavy. Instead of excitement, their thoughts swirled with anger, injustice, and unanswered questions. 40 minutes into the flight, Vanessa's phone chimed with an alert. She glanced at the screen, then froze. Oh my God. Julius, sensing the urgency in her voice, leaned forward. What is it? Vanessa turned the screen toward him, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. An aviation blogger, well known for tracking celebrity and high-profile jets, had posted a short video. The clip, presumably filmed by a ground crew member, showed a snippet of the confrontation. Though the audio was muffled by the roar of jet engines, the visuals were unmistakable. It captured Steele's sharp, dismissive gestures, his scathing tone as he ordered them off the jet. And then, it cut to his stunned expression the moment he realized the truth. Within an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. And the hashtags? #KnowWhoYou'reTalkingTo? JetGate. Steele, big mistake. Elijah let out a low whistle, shaking his head as he scrolled through the comment section. Sienna, still uncertain, frowned. Are people going to talk about us? Julius nodded, his phone buzzing non-stop with messages from business associates, friends, and media contacts. Yes, sweetie, he said quietly. They are. Vanessa's expression remained unreadable as she kept scrolling. Thousands of voices online were condemning Steele's arrogance and prejudice, but there were also trolls, racists, detractors twisting the story. She locked her phone screen, unwilling to sink into the chaos. Julius reached across the table, gently patting her hand. Let's focus on the fact that people are standing up for what's right. His voice was calm, but firm. We won't let the negativity overshadow that. Vanessa exhaled, finally allowing herself a small, tired smile. Outside the jet's expansive windows, the Miami skyline began to emerge in the distance, bathed in golden light, untouched by the storm they had just escaped. What had started as an ordinary flight had now become a viral moment of reckoning. But the real storm? It was just beginning. The video spread like wildfire. The confrontation between Martin Steele and the Langfords had now become a global talking point, a glaring example of prejudice, arrogance, and unchecked entitlement. Elijah, watching the footage on Vanessa's phone, let out a low whistle. Well, that's one way for the world to find out. Sienna, frowning at the grainy, screechy audio, looked up. People are going to talk about us, aren't they? A lot. Julius, glancing at his own phone, could already see the notifications piling up, messages from business partners, friends, and industry leaders offering their support. He nodded. Yes, sweetheart, he said quietly. They are. Vanessa scrolled through the comment sections, her expression unreadable. There was outrage. A wave of solidarity had risen across social media, condemning Steele's behavior. But there was also another side. Trolls, racists, naysayers. People twisting the story to fit their own toxic narratives. Vanessa took a deep breath and shut off the screen, refusing to drown in the noise. Julius reached across and gently patted her hand. Let's focus on the fact that so many people are standing up for what's right. His voice was steady, grounding her. We can't let the negativity overshadow that. She exhaled slowly, forcing a small, tired smile. The cabin lights dimmed, and the flight attendant moved through the aisle, serving lunch, seafood for the adults, chicken tenders and fries for the kids, Sienna's special request. But the usual light-hearted atmosphere of a family trip was gone. Even as their jet neared Miami, with the storm clouds clearing and the coastline gleaming under the sun, the weight of the incident still loomed over them. Vanessa made a silent vow. They wouldn't let Martin Steele's actions define them. They wouldn't let his ignorance ruin what mattered. Tonight's meeting at Hampton University, Miami, where they were expanding scholarships for underprivileged students, deserved their full attention. They had a mission. And nothing, not even a viral controversy, would derail it. What the Langfords didn't know was that Martin Steele's problems were only beginning. While he might have brushed them off as trespassers, the video told the world another story. And it was only a matter of time before the Orion Airways Board of Directors demanded an explanation for their CEO's humiliating public disaster. The Onyx Falcon X landed smoothly at Blue Water Executive Airport, Miami's hub for private aviation. As the jet door opened, a rush of humid Florida air filled the cabin. The Langfords stepped onto the sunlit tarmac, where a luxury car, arranged by Hampton University, waited for them. Their driver, a well-dressed man named George, greeted them with a polite nod before carefully loading their luggage into the trunk. Despite the heat pressing down on them, the ocean breeze provided a hint of relief. They slid into the car's cool leather seats, escaping the Miami sun as they pulled away from the airstrip. Elijah, already glued to his phone, suddenly looked up. "Dad." Julius turned as his son tilted the screen toward him. The video's at over 1 million views. Julius and Vanessa exchanged a glance. The last thing they wanted was to become the face of a racial discrimination scandal. But the footage was too powerful to ignore. Julius pressed a hand to his chest, steadying his breath as the weight of it all settled on him. By the time they arrived at the Azure Grand Miami, a sleek, 5-star hotel, it was clear that the story had reached mainstream news outlets. As they stepped into the marble-floored lobby, they immediately noticed the shift. The hotel staff, recognizing them, greeted them with extra warmth and attentiveness. But it was the reporters in the distance, hovering just beyond the velvet ropes, cameras lowered but ready, that confirmed their suspicions. They were being watched. They ignored the whispers and the discreet camera flashes as a hotel concierge swiftly ushered them into a private check-in lounge. Soon, they were inside a dedicated elevator, heading up to their suite. Only once they stepped into their spacious penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the sparkling Miami skyline, did Vanessa finally let out a deep, exhausted sigh. So much for a quiet weekend. Julius, standing behind her, gently rubbed her shoulders. "It's going to be okay. We'll handle this. Let's just focus on tonight's university event. Let's not let this overshadow everything we've worked for." Meanwhile, Elijah and Sienna had already begun exploring the suite. The hotel had left an impressive welcome spread, fresh fruit, chocolates, and an elegant floral arrangement. Sienna gasped at the luxury of it all, momentarily distracted from the tension. For a moment, their spirits lifted. Julius checked his watch. "We have a few hours before the scholarship gala. Everybody rest up, we'll head to campus soon." Vanessa nodded, but her mind was already racing. If the press was already tracking them, would the media attention overshadow the real purpose of their trip? Would this scandal distract from the cause that mattered most? An hour later, as Vanessa touched up her hair in the mirror, her phone buzzed. She frowned, checking the caller ID. Unknown number. She hesitated, then let it go to voicemail. A text followed seconds later. "This is Priya from CNN, requesting comment regarding Martin Steele's confrontation with your family." Vanessa inhaled sharply, setting the phone down. A part of her had known this moment was coming. She turned, walking into the suite's living area where Julius was adjusting his tie. He raised an eyebrow. "Reporter?" Vanessa nodded slowly. "It's CNN." Julius exhaled, his jaw tightening. "And so it begins." Julius adjusted his tie, his eyes flicking up as Vanessa entered the room. "Reporter?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Vanessa sighed, shaking her head. "CNN," Julius grimaced. "We need a strategy. The last thing we want is to add fuel to the fire or make it seem like we're engaging in a public feud." Vanessa nodded, running a hand through her hair. "We can release a brief statement, just the facts. We're minding our own business on our own jet." He acted out of line. Simple, clear, professional. Julius considered it, then nodded. "All right, but after the event, tonight, let's focus on what really matters, helping students." With that, they headed toward the private elevator, descending to the lobby where a university liaison awaited them. A woman in a graceful navy suit stepped forward with a warm smile. "Dr. Camille Torres," she introduced herself. "Professor of Sociology at Hampton University, Miami. It's an honor to have you here, Mr. and Mrs. Langford. I've followed your scholarship initiative closely. Our entire committee is thrilled about your partnership." They exchanged pleasantries before stepping into a waiting car, which whisked them toward the university. The ride was short but scenic. Palm trees lining the streets as the early evening sun cast long shadows across the campus grounds. Despite everything swirling in the media, there was a quiet excitement in the air. Tonight wasn't about controversy. It was about opportunity. The university auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Students in formal attire mingled, while faculty and local business leaders exchanged quiet conversations. On stage, banners displaying the Langford Foundation's logo stood proudly beside the Hampton University Miami crest. Vanessa noticed a few cameras near the back, likely campus media or local news covering the event. As they stepped inside, a hush fell over the room, followed by thunderous applause. For the first time that day, Vanessa felt something other than stress. Gratitude. This was why they had come. For these students, their dreams, their future. For a moment, the scandal didn't exist. The Langfords moved through the crowd, shaking hands, chatting with scholarship recipients, listening to their stories. Finally, they took their seats on stage. Dr. Torres stepped up to the podium, clearing her throat. "Tonight, we celebrate more than just academic achievement," she began. "We celebrate access. We celebrate opportunity. And none of this would be possible without the generosity and vision of the Langford Foundation." She gestured toward them. "Please welcome Julius and Vanessa Langford." The applause was deafening. Julius stood first, his presence commanding respect as he approached the microphone. "Thank you, everyone, for such a warm reception," he began, his deep voice carrying across the auditorium. "My wife and I believe education is the cornerstone of progress. Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. And that's why we're here. This scholarship program is about empowering bright minds to shape the future." The audience erupted in cheers. Vanessa took over, her voice filled with emotion. "Over the years, I've met so many students who embody resilience, determination, potential. We're not just investing in education, we're investing in people, in leaders, in change makers." Her words struck a chord. By the time she stepped away from the microphone, the audience was on their feet, a standing ovation. For the next hour, the weight of what had happened earlier disappeared, overshadowed by positivity and unity. But just as they stepped off stage, a familiar tension returned. A university staff member approached, her expression uneasy. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, lowering her voice. "CNN and NBC reporters are outside. They're asking for interviews about what happened in Connecticut." Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. Julius exhaled sharply, shaking his head. They had hoped to keep the focus on the scholarships, not the scandal. "Is there a back exit?" Julius asked quietly. The staff member nodded. "Yes, I can lead you there if you'd rather avoid the press." Vanessa hesitated. Maybe a short comment, just enough to clear the air, would settle the speculation. But at the same time, anything they said could fuel the media frenzy even further. The scholarship initiative deserved the spotlight, not a sensationalized story. In the end, they made the call. They would leave quietly. Elijah and Sienna followed, a mix of curiosity and disappointment on their faces as the family slipped out of a side entrance. A waiting car idled at the curb. The moment the doors shut, the engine purred to life, easing them away from campus. From the back seat, Elijah leaned forward. "Mom? Dad? Maybe we should do one interview. Just set the record straight." Julius pressed his lips together, staring out the window as city lights blurred past. Let's talk to our public relations team first, he said finally. Vanessa nodded, but her thoughts were already elsewhere. The night had been a success, but would the scandal continue to overshadow their mission? She wasn't sure. But she did know one thing. They weren't backing down. Julius tapped on his phone, scrolling through the latest messages. We talked to our PR manager first, he said, opening a text thread with Linda Yao, their trusted communications consultant. Vanessa nodded, then turned her gaze to the glittering Miami skyline outside the car window. The city lights shimmered like scattered diamonds against the inky sky, reflecting in the glass. She had hoped this trip would be solely about philanthropy, a celebration of giving back to the community. Instead, one ignorant encounter with Martin Steele had cast a dark shadow over everything. Before returning to the hotel, the Langfords decided to stop for a late dinner at a quiet, exclusive restaurant known for its privacy. They savored delicate seafood and fresh tropical salads, attempting to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But their phones never stopped buzzing. The scandal was going viral, overshadowing their philanthropic mission. As they sipped fruit-infused water and picked at the remains of a key lime pie, Vanessa took a moment to observe her family. She saw resilience. A quiet determination not to let ignorance or prejudice dictate their course. She reached for Julius's hand under the table. He squeezed hers gently, a shared promise. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. By dawn, the situation had escalated even further. Major networks were now replaying the grainy tarmac footage, each offering their own spin. Social media was ablaze with commentary on race, privilege, and corporate responsibility. Hashtags like Orion Scandal, Jetgate, Steele Big Mistake trended worldwide. At sunrise, Linda Yao, the Langfords' PR manager, arrived at their hotel suite. She was a petite woman with sharp eyes and impeccable style, wasting no time as she set her tablet down on the coffee table. I have news, she announced. The Langfords, still groggy from a restless night, gathered around. Linda swiped through headlines. A spokesperson for Orion Airways just released a statement. Martin Steele claims he deeply regrets the misunderstanding and is seeking to make amends. Elijah raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? Really? Linda smirked. That's what they're going with, but behind the scenes, it's worse for him. The board at Orion Airways is furious. They've called an emergency session to discuss disciplinary action, or even forcing his resignation. Elijah's eyebrows shot up. Wait, so they might fire him? Linda nodded, lips pursed. He's become a liability, and ironically, Orion Airways is about to launch a new campaign, Fly with Dignity. This scandal completely undermines that message. Sienna, scrolling through her own phone, muttered, Good, he deserves it. Vanessa smoothed her daughter's hair. Karma might come around, yes, but we shouldn't celebrate someone's downfall. It's just sad that it had to happen this way. Sienna nodded, not fully convinced, but understanding her mother's wisdom. Linda took a seat, crossing one leg over the other. Now, here's the next problem. The press is camped outside this hotel. They want your side of the story. Julius sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course they do. Here's what I suggest, Linda continued. We issue a concise statement. We focus on the facts. Steele's behavior was unacceptable, but we won't let it overshadow the good work you're doing. We keep it calm, professional, and above all, gracious. Julius nodded, folding his arms. That's smart. We don't want to seem vengeful, but we also can't stay silent. That would look like we're ignoring or condoning what happened. Linda's face brightened slightly. Exactly. Also, we should use this moment to highlight the scholarship program. We show that despite the negativity, you're still committed to uplifting communities. In short, she smiled, tapping her pen against her tablet, we control the narrative. For the next hour, Linda and the Langfords worked together to craft the perfect response. They chose their words carefully, ensuring the statement conveyed both their disappointment in Steele's behavior and their unwavering commitment to philanthropy. At noon, Linda held a brief press conference in a private meeting room at the hotel. A handful of select journalists were allowed inside. She stood at the podium, cleared her throat, and began reading the statement. We, the Langford family, are deeply saddened by the recent incident involving Mr. Martin Steele at Blue Water Executive Airport. As we prepared to board our privately owned jet, we were confronted and treated with disrespect. No family or individual should face prejudice or assumptions based on appearance. However, we want to make it clear that our primary focus remains on our philanthropic endeavors, especially the recent scholarship initiative at Hampton University, Miami. We hope that this unfortunate event sparks necessary conversations and positive changes within the airline industry. We hold no personal ill will toward Mr. Steele and trust that Orion Airways will handle this matter appropriately. The statement struck a perfect balance, firm but not inflammatory. Journalists clamored for follow-up questions, but Linda swiftly shut it down, reiterating the family's decision not to dwell on negativity. As the press conference ended, Vanessa let out a slow breath. At least now, they were taking back control. That evening, before returning home, the Langfords attended a charity art auction at the Miami Contemporary Arts Center. The event featured local artists donating pieces to raise funds for community programs. It was the kind of evening they typically loved, a chance to engage with creatives, support up-and-coming talent, and contribute to a cause they believed in. But tonight, they noticed something different. The attention. The moment they entered the grand hall, there was a subtle shift in energy. Photographers snapped discreet photos. Onlookers whispered. The scandal had made them household names overnight, or better or worse. Vanessa inhaled deeply, lifting her chin. They wouldn't let this define them. Because at the end of the day, actions spoke louder than controversy. And their actions were just getting started. The Miami Contemporary Arts Center buzzed with quiet conversation, the hum of voices blending with soft instrumental music. The Langfords had always loved events like this, celebrating creativity, supporting emerging talent, and giving back to the community. But tonight, something was different. There was a heightened sense of attention around them. Cameramen discreetly snapped photos when they emerged from the crowd. Onlookers whispered as they passed. All eyes seemed to be on them. In a corner of the gallery, Vanessa lingered in front of a painting bursting with tropical flora. A swirl of green, yellow, and red, the colors seemingly dancing on the canvas. She was captivated until she sensed a presence at her elbow. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped forward, wearing a name badge that read Carlos Medina, art collector and well-known Miami philanthropist. "Mrs. Langford, apologies for interrupting," he said warmly. "I just wanted to express my admiration for how you're handling this entire fiasco with Mr. Steele. It couldn't have been easy, being dismissed on your own property." Vanessa turned, offering a polite but reserved smile. "Thank you, Mr. Medina. We're doing our best to keep our focus on positive things." Carlos nodded. "Precisely. In fact, if you don't mind, some of us in the philanthropic community here in Miami would love to collaborate with your family. Your scholarship initiative has the potential to expand, perhaps in partnership with local community colleges and vocational programs." Vanessa's eyes lit up. Even in adversity, opportunity could flourish. "I'd love to hear more," she said, exchanging contact details. Despite the dark cloud of the airport incident, small rays of promise still shone through. Across the hall, Julius sipped a glass of sparkling water, his eyes following Elijah and Sienna as they explored the exhibits. Elijah was drawn to the modern sculptures, while Sienna stood transfixed in front of a digital light installation that pulsed with color. Julius's heart warmed. No matter how chaotic the external world became, their family bond remained unbreakable. A hush spread through the crowd as the auction began. The Langfords took their seats near the front, the atmosphere crackling with excitement. As the third art piece was unveiled, a breathtaking mosaic made of recycled materials, Julius's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message from Linda Yao. "Linda, urgent. Martin Steele's PR team just reached out. He wants to speak with you." Julius's pulse quickened. He subtly turned his phone toward Vanessa, who read the message and raised an eyebrow. "He wants to talk now?" she whispered. Another text came through. "Linda, he's requesting a meeting at a neutral location. Says he wants to apologize directly." Vanessa's expression remained unreadable. "An apology or damage control," she murmured. Julius exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. "Maybe both." Vanessa's eyes flickered with a mix of anger, empathy, and caution. "If we agree, it should be after we return home. We have enough on our plate here." Julius nodded in agreement and typed a response. "Julius, we're in Miami. We can discuss a meeting once we're back in New York. No guarantees." Slipping his phone back into his pocket, he tried to refocus on the auction, but his mind buzzed with questions. Did Steele truly regret his actions, or was this just an elaborate PR stunt to salvage his career? The mosaic sold for an impressive sum, the audience breaking into applause. But Julius barely registered it. When the auction ended, the Langfords congratulated the organizers and quietly slipped out. The hot Miami night air wrapped around them as their driver opened the car doors. As the city lights blurred into neon streaks, an uncharacteristic silence settled in the car. Even Sienna, usually the most talkative of them all, stared pensively out the window. Finally, Elijah broke the silence. "Are we going to see that guy Steele again?" Julius and Vanessa exchanged glances. "Perhaps," Julius admitted. "He wants to apologize, apparently." Elijah frowned. "He should, but I don't trust him." Vanessa met her son's gaze in the rearview mirror. "I understand, sweetheart. We'll be careful." The next morning, the Langfords boarded their Onyx Falcon X at Blue Water Executive Airport. The flight home was subdued. Captain Hayes shared updates on weather conditions, his tone professional as always, carefully avoiding any mention of the scandal. Mid-flight, Vanessa gazed out the window, watching the coastline fade into a watercolor blur. Above the clouds, the sky was calm. Yet inside her, a storm still raged. She felt torn. On one hand, she had every right to be furious at Martin Steele. What he had done was unacceptable, demeaning, and reckless. But at the same time, she had always believed in redemption. People could change. People could learn. But was he capable of that? Or was this just about saving his reputation? As the plane cruised toward New York, Vanessa wasn't sure what they would find waiting for them. But one thing was certain. The confrontation with Martin Steele wasn't over yet. And whatever happened next, they wouldn't be caught off guard. Vanessa stared out the jet's window, watching as the clouds gave way to the skyline below. Could people change? Could they truly repent? She had always believed in redemption, in the capacity for growth and reflection. But could she forgive Martin Steele so easily? Beside her, Julius was focused on his laptop, responding to business emails. Occasionally, he glanced at Vanessa, reaching for her hand in a quiet show of support. In the seats across from them, Elijah and Sienna sat with headphones on, engrossed in a movie, decompressing from the whirlwind of the past few days. The flight attendant's voice soon broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Hudson Executive Airport." Vanessa's stomach tightened. The last time she had stepped onto that tarmac, she had been humiliated, forced to defend herself and her family against an assumption that they didn't belong. Yet now, as the jet's wheels touched down, she realized something. They had never needed permission to belong. The injustice had been real, but so was their resilience. And this time, no one tried to stop them. Instead, as they disembarked, the ground crew nodded respectfully and the VIP terminal staff greeted them with polite smiles. It was as if the entire airport silently acknowledged what had happened before. Waiting outside the terminal was Linda Yao, phone in hand, looking slightly harried. "Welcome back," she greeted, offering a sympathetic smile. "Any trouble on the flight?" Julius shook his head. "Smooth. Good." Linda exhaled, ushering them toward a waiting SUV. Steele's office reached out again. Vanessa raised an eyebrow as she slid into the car. Linda continued. "Orion Airways board is meeting tomorrow. They've asked if you'd be willing to accept an in-person apology from Steele right after." A hush settled over the car. Vanessa folded her hands in her lap. "What do you think, Linda? Good idea or bad?" Linda hesitated. "It could be good PR for both sides, but only if he's sincere. If this is just a corporate damage control move, it could backfire, make it look staged." From the back seat, Sienna piped up, half listening. "What if we make him apologize in front of the same ground crew he embarrassed us in front of?" Linda let out a small chuckle. "An interesting idea, but that might seem retaliatory. We want to show grace, but also resolve." Julius stared out the tinted window, watching the airport fade into the distance. "Let's hear him out," he said finally. "But on our terms. Neutral location, no cameras, unless we decide otherwise. We're not going to be used for a PR stunt." Linda nodded, taking notes on her phone. "Understood. I'll communicate those conditions." Thus it was decided. The next day, they would meet Martin Steele face to face. And whether it was a moment of true reckoning or just another performance, they would soon find out. The Langfords chose a discreet, upscale lounge in Midtown Manhattan for the meeting. The space exuded refined luxury, plush armchairs, soft lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows offering sweeping views of the skyline. Julius arrived early with Vanessa, Linda, and a pair of plainclothes security guards. Elijah and Sienna stayed home, under the care of a trusted family friend. This was an adult conversation, one they needed to handle privately. A hostess led them to a secluded corner booth, where the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Soft jazz music played overhead, as Vanessa took a deep breath, sipping her iced water to steady her nerves. 15 minutes later, Martin Steele appeared at the entrance. He was alone, dressed in a tailored navy suit, but he looked different this time. Tense. Subdued, lacking the imperious swagger he had displayed at the airport. His eyes scanned the lounge until they landed on the Langfords. Linda stood to greet him, introducing him to the security detail for everyone's comfort. Steele hesitated, then extended a hand toward Julius. For a moment, Julius considered leaving it hanging. Then, finally, he accepted it. Vanessa remained seated, her posture poised but guarded. Once everyone was settled, Steele cleared his throat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." His voice wasn't as confident as before. Julius nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "We'd like to hear what you have to say." Steele swallowed, his fingers fidgeting with the cufflinks on his crisp white shirt. I want to express my deepest regret for my actions at Hudson Executive." A beat of silence. "My behavior was disrespectful, presumptuous." He hesitated, his jaw tightening, and frankly, racist. The last word hung in the air like a lead weight. Vanessa studied his face, searching for sincerity. Steele continued, his voice lower. "That day, I was under a lot of pressure. Orion Airways was on the verge of closing a major deal to expand our private aviation sector. I thought you were interfering with that. I jumped to terrible conclusions." Julius remained silent, letting him speak. Steele exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "The truth is, I saw you. I saw your family, and I made an assumption. I thought," he faltered, "I thought you didn't belong." He lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Julius. "That was wrong. That was entirely on me, and I am truly sorry." Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. Steele's words sounded genuine, but were they? Julius finally spoke, his voice measured. "We've all been under pressure before, Mr. Steele, but not everyone chooses to act with hostility and prejudice." Steele nodded quickly, his hands gripping the table's edge. "You're right, there's no excuse. So why are you really here?" Vanessa asked, her voice calm but sharp. "Is this about saving face, or are you actually willing to change?" Steele exhaled slowly, as if struggling with the answer himself. "I know this apology can't undo what I did. I know it can't erase the damage. But I needed to say it, to your faces, not just as a press release. And if there's any way I can make amends, I want to do it." A tense silence followed. The city's skyline shimmered in the window behind him, a stark contrast to the weight of the moment. Finally, Julius leaned back, exhaling. "We'll consider it." Vanessa nodded. "Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Steele. Time will tell whether you truly mean what you're saying." Steele nodded, his expression unreadable. Linda, sensing the conversation had reached its conclusion, stood up. "I think that's all for now." The Langfords rose from their seats. Another brief, awkward handshake followed. And just like that, they walked out. Not as victims, not as mere subjects of a viral controversy, but as a family who had stood their ground. Whatever happened next, that was something Steele could never take from them. Julius's expression remained firm, his voice steady. "We've all been under pressure before, Mr. Steele, yet not everyone chooses to act with hostility and prejudice." Martin Steele nodded, his cheeks slightly red with shame. "Yes, you're right, there's no excuse." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "I am truly sorry, and I'm also sorry for what this ordeal has put your family through. The viral attention, the hateful comments, I deeply regret it." Vanessa leaned forward slightly, arms folded. "This didn't just inconvenience us," she said, her voice cool but full of restrained emotion. "This has upended our lives in ways you can't begin to imagine. Our philanthropic work is being overshadowed by a scandal we never asked for. We faced negative backlash, some even blaming us for ruining your career. It's been stressful for our children." A flicker of guilt crossed Steele's face. "I understand." His voice was quieter now. He sat back, running a hand over his face. The board is deciding my fate at Orion Airways today. I fully expect them to either ask for my resignation or demote me significantly. Regardless, I wanted to meet you face to face, not for show, not for damage control. I owe you a real apology." A heavy silence followed. Outside the lounge's grand windows, the Manhattan skyline glistened, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. Linda remained quiet, watching closely, prepared to intervene if necessary. Steele took a deep breath, his voice strained. "If there's anything I can do to make amends, donations to your causes, direct restitution, I'll do it. If you want a public apology, I'll make it. I just need you to know I'm remorseful." Julius and Vanessa exchanged a long look. Finally, Vanessa spoke softly. "We appreciate your words, and we believe people can learn from their mistakes. But trust isn't built with apologies, it's earned through action." Steele nodded, relief mingling with sadness. "Understood. If there's a path forward, I'll do whatever it takes to walk it." Linda, sensing the moment was shifting, spoke up. "Mr. Steele, perhaps we can coordinate a formal apology, not just to the Langfords, but one that addresses the broader issue of racial bias in the aviation industry. The Langford Foundation is launching new diversity and inclusion initiatives. If your involvement is genuine, it could actually help create change." Steele looked up, his posture shifting slightly. For the first time, there was a glimmer of something beyond guilt, maybe even purpose. "Yes," he said, almost too quickly. "Absolutely. I come from airline management, not philanthropy, but I'm willing to learn and contribute in any way I can." Julius leaned back, arms crossed. "We'll consider it. But for now, let's just say we hear your apology, and we accept it. That doesn't mean we condone what happened, but holding on to bitterness won't help anyone." Vanessa nodded, though her eyes held a guarded compassion. "We accept your apology, but real change starts within. We hope you reflect on that." Steele's posture relaxed slightly, some of the tension melting from his face. "Thank you. I can't tell you how much that means." He hesitated. "I promise, I'll try to be worthy of your forgiveness." A quiet hush settled between them. Everyone at the table recognized the weight of the moment. The prejudice that had ignited this entire fiasco wasn't undone by a single apology. But maybe, just maybe, it was a first step toward something better. Linda stood first, thanking Steele for his time. The Langfords rose as well. A final, slightly awkward handshake followed, first between Steele and Julius, then Vanessa. And then, it was over. The Langfords turned and walked out, accompanied by Linda and their security team. Behind them, Steele remained momentarily slumped in his booth, his expression one of introspective regret. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, a crisp evening breeze swept through Midtown. The city hummed around them, traffic rushing past, pedestrians moving obliviously through their own lives, unaware of the moral reckoning that had just taken place inside that lounge. The Langfords felt a weight begin to lift, though the events of the day left them contemplative. Then, Linda's phone buzzed. She answered swiftly, stepping away from the couple. "Hello?" A pause. Her murmured, "Uh-huh," quickly turned into a series of sharp exclamations. When she finally ended the call, her face was stunned. "That was one of my contacts at Orion Airways," she said, rejoining them. "The board just made their decision. Martin Steele has been removed as CEO, effective immediately." Vanessa and Julius both let out quiet gasps. "That fast?" Vanessa murmured. Julius frowned. "Did they say who's replacing him?" Linda shook her head. "Not yet. All I know is that his position was deemed untenable. The company's stock took a hit after the scandal, and their largest investors demanded accountability. Steele is out." Vanessa stared down the street. The streams of New Yorkers passing by, each one wrapped up in their own concerns, their own lives, made the moment feel even more surreal. The abruptness of the news stunned her. She thought of Steele, alone in that lounge, possibly about to receive the same call. A pang of sympathy struck her, followed by the memory of how harshly he had treated them. Humans were complicated creatures. Redemption was never simple. Julius finally spoke, his voice low. "I suppose that's the final chapter in this saga." Vanessa glanced at him. "Or the beginning of a new one." They stepped into their waiting car, the city lights reflecting in the tinted windows. No matter what came next, one thing was certain. Their story wasn't over yet. As the car pulled away from the lounge, Vanessa sat in thoughtful silence. She couldn't help but wonder if at that very moment, Martin Steele was receiving the same phone call she had just heard Linda take. The one confirming his downfall. A pang of sympathy struck her. Not because he didn't deserve the consequences, he did, but because humans were complicated creatures. He had built his career on power and entitlement, and now it had crumbled beneath him. Had he truly learned anything from this? Or was he just another man trying to save face? Julius wrapped a warm arm around her, pulling her gently toward him. "I suppose that's the final chapter in this saga," he said quietly. Vanessa let out a slow breath. "Or the beginning of a new one." She slid into the back seat, the doors closing with a soft click. The familiar streets of Manhattan whirled past the tinted windows. Billboards flashed, car horns blared, pedestrians weaved through traffic in that effortless chaos unique to the city. But inside the car, an odd stillness enveloped the Langfords. They had come face to face with discrimination, stood their ground, and witnessed the fall of a powerful man whose arrogance had spiraled out of control. Vanessa reached for Julius's hand, their fingers interlocked. "Do you think we did the right thing? Hearing him out like that?" she asked. Julius sighed, leaning his head back against the seat. "Yes, I think so. Holding on to anger would have just poisoned us. We let him apologize. The rest is up to him." From the front seat, Linda glanced back, thoughtful. "This might open up new opportunities for the Langford Foundation," she mused. "The press is still watching. If we use this moment to highlight diversity in aviation, scholarships, flight training, mentorships, we could do some real good." A small smile curved Vanessa's lips. "I like that idea. Let's see how we can make that happen." As the car rolled toward their Upper East Side brownstone, the Langfords felt a sense of closure beginning to take shape. The moment they stepped inside, Elijah and Sienna came running. Sienna threw herself into Vanessa's arms, while Elijah hovered nearby, trying to appear nonchalant. "So, what happened?" Elijah asked, curiosity winning out. Julius set his briefcase down, exhaling. "He apologized," he paused, then added, "and he got fired." Elijah's eyebrows shot up. "Wow, so I guess that's that?" Sienna curled up beside Vanessa on the sofa. "It's good that he said sorry, right? Even if he lost his job?" Vanessa ran her fingers through her daughter's curls. "Yes, baby. It's important to learn from mistakes. Sometimes the consequences are tough, but we all have to face them." That evening they shared a simple dinner: pasta, garlic bread, salad. A welcome return to normalcy after so much drama. The conversation drifted to school projects, Elijah's latest app design, and Sienna's upcoming soccer match. Laughter replaced tension, and for the first time in days, they weren't thinking about the scandal. Just family. Later, when the kids had gone to bed, Vanessa and Julius lingered in the dimly lit living room, soft jazz playing in the background. She leaned into him, a warm cup of chamomile tea in her hands. "I feel lighter," she admitted. Julius pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice gentle. "Me too. It's over. Or at least, the worst of it is." Vanessa set down her mug, turning to him. "What do you think about Linda's idea? A diversity initiative in aviation?" Julius's eyes sparkled with interest. "That's brilliant. We could sponsor flight training programs for underrepresented youth, partner with private jet companies to create internships." Vanessa's smile widened. "We could name it after my father." Her voice softened. "He was the one who taught me the importance of giving back." Julius nodded, a proud warmth filling his chest. "He would be so proud. Let's do it." And in that quiet moment, the seeds of a legacy were planted, a direct response to the prejudice they faced, a path forward, not out of anger, but out of purpose. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse, Martin Steele packed up his executive office. The board's decision had come swiftly. He had a week to vacate the premises. The once unshakable CEO now stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city he had once commanded. His shoulders sagged, bitterness simmering beneath the surface. But as his mind replayed the past few days, one image lingered. The genuine acceptance he had seen in the Langfords' eyes. They had every reason to reject him outright, to humiliate him as he had humiliated them. But they hadn't. Karma had struck, yes, but perhaps it had also awakened something else. A chance for real change, if he was willing to take it. And that choice, as always, would be his to make. For the Langfords, this moment was about moving forward, turning adversity into opportunity. They had faced prejudice head-on, stood their ground, and refused to let it define them. Now it was time to use their experience to create change for others. For Martin Steele, it meant something different. He had been forced to confront his own prejudices, to recognize that power and privilege could vanish overnight. And most importantly, he had learned a lesson that many never do. Respect must be earned, not demanded. The scandal would soon fade from front-page headlines, replaced by new controversies, new distractions. But the lessons learned would remain, quietly but permanently, reshaping the lives of everyone involved. And in the end, that was the true power of facing the storm head-on. 2 months later, the Langford Foundation held a press conference at JFK International Airport, announcing a groundbreaking new initiative. Partnering with Titan Aerospace, they introduced Wings of Diversity, a program dedicated to increasing minority and female representation in aviation. The initiative provided scholarships, mentorship, and career pathways for aspiring pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals. Standing at the podium, Vanessa's voice echoed through a small hangar, where journalists, students, and industry leaders gathered. When we encountered prejudice, we could have stepped back, retreated. But instead, we chose to elevate others, to ensure that they have access to the skies and to a future without limits. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed in rapid succession as Vanessa stepped aside. Julius joined her on stage, his smile full of pride. "We believe the best response to hate or misunderstanding is constructive action," he said. "Today, we are proud to open doors for aspiring pilots, engineers, and aviation experts, regardless of where they come from." The audience rose to their feet, applause filling the hangar. After the event, the family posed with a group of wide-eyed teens, each one eager to apply for the new scholarships. The sense of hope in the room was tangible. Overhead, a plane soared across the sky, its contrails etching a path through the bright blue expanse, a fitting symbol of possibility. From a shadowed corner, Martin Steele watched. He had come unannounced, wearing casual clothes, standing apart from the crowd. His shoulders were hunched, his face pensive as he listened to the Langfords speak. He had nothing to say, not yet. If he had told them he was coming, perhaps they would have invited him to speak. But he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, he slipped away without fanfare, walking back toward his car. Before leaving, he pulled out his phone and typed a message. "Congratulations on the launch. Let me know if there's any way I can support." It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. From the tarmac fiasco to this moment of bridging social gaps, the Langfords had proven something powerful. Adversity can seed triumph, if approached with courage and grace. What had once been a painful experience had now become a movement, one that championed opportunity, diversity, and inclusion within the aviation world and beyond. Along the way, the world had seen how a single act of arrogance could topple even the most powerful figures, a reminder that no one is above accountability. And yet, even in the aftermath, there was room for remorse, forgiveness, the promise of personal growth. Because in the end, true justice isn't just about consequences, it's about creating a better future for those who come next.